LiDAR collection system. You change the PRF, the wavelength, any of the physical properties, the scanning, resolution, the spectral resolution of the device. What would you change?
A greater point density would be wonderful, a faster sampling rate. One thing that a lot of approaches in the reconstruction are having trouble with is you get 4 to 5 points for a single roof plane on a house, and it's difficult to reconstruct that. One thing I would have loved to do is not so much necessarily change things on the hardware, and if I had if I had additional resources at my disposal, I would have loved to have gone back and talk to like maybe someone in the math department like Dr. Young and talk about, incorporate her theory on how when the laser beam propagates through the atmosphere, it undergoes changes. You shoot a light, when you look at the penny at the bottom of the pool and you dive right forward, you're going to wind up hitting concrete. The light is not a vacuum. It's the same thing with the various constituents of the atmosphere. I could not find a paper through I saw papers where people said there's problems in the sensors themselves. They undergo like drift. And the GPS, the INS, and if the INS wasn't calibrated correctly with the LiDAR sensor, there was a constant offset that caused systematic errors as well. And I saw papers documenting that, but I went to the IGARS conference, and I remember someone didn't show up, they had any questions. I had tons of questions. And I got, is anyone working on removing the atmospheric effects from the LiDAR beam propagates through it? And a lot of people aren't even recognizing this in there. They're not even calling it noise source. And that's something that I would have liked to expand upon, is developing, because there's models that exist out there that account for this. Let's use those models to remove that noise, and then afterwards, let's compare how did this noise wind up influencing our approach, is one thing I would have liked to further explore. As far as from the hardware side though, I can say from the aerial imagery, if the planes wound up flying too low and they ortho-rectified the image, then you don't see the top of the image. You see the side of the image, which you're not supposed to see because it's a native perspective. And this wound up being a challenge in the aerial imagery as well as the registration. Luckily, I was using a phase correlation approach, and offsets like that didn't dramatically alter the effect of the demonstration. I should also mention someone in the technical seminar at Harris. I was upsampling the LiDAR, the data to be approximate to the same aerial imagery. They said no, downsample the LiDAR data, the aerial imagery, the LiDAR data, and that wound up working a lot better because upsampling the LiDAR data to that, an order of magnitude, wound up introducing quite a few interpolation errors. More questions?
I've got one list, and I'll let somebody else go.
One of your slides, slide 48, back over to
47.
So now you have your approach here on these two data sets and you compare with other techniques. Can you comment on the numbers here? Like I look at number 4, there's a 90% completeness and 85% correctness. So what does this tell you compared to your technique? Let's say you are a classifier guy, right? And you look at these numbers. Do these numbers, if I take them literally, what does this tell me? One number is greater than the other and so forth, so I don't know. Is it...
90% is pretty nice. 9/10 of the points that we're calling out of all 10, let's say there's 10 possible building points. We've successfully identified 9 of them as a building. That 90% is pretty high, as well as 85% of those points that you identify as building actually correspond to building. One thing that you actually need to contribute, didn't specify, and they didn't point this out in the retaining kit, is he only tested his approach on 288 buildings, and a lot of them were rather larger buildings. He didn't have a lot of smaller buildings in his data set. And this winds up being a problem because then you'll present these numbers, and this is indicative of mostly larger buildings. He didn't wind up tackling these smaller buildings. I mean, if we want to go back and I wound up comparing this more rigorously in the dissertation, where he only has buildings of a certain size. So I said, let's go back and look at our cumulative completeness as a function of building size, and we can compare that as well as to his. But the other thing is his point density is significantly different. I said it's 1 point per 1.2 meters squared, but then he comes back and labels his as 2 to 3 points per meter squared. So I put them all as the number of points per meter squared to put everything in the same playing field. But he's got more points per meter squared with a higher point density. What does the point density have to do? Rottensteiner, in his methods, was actually, he went through an experiment and he decreased the resolution of his digital terrain and digital surface model, which were feature sets in which he used to make his classification. And decreasing the resolution, he wound up noticing that it significantly affected the accuracy of his algorithm. The resolution does come into play. This resolution is getting disgustingly better as technology comes out. It's amazing in what they come out each day, but the resolution certainly influences it. Rottensteiner's completeness and correctness are wonderful. I mean, 91% of the buildings, what he's calling his building actually corresponds to building. His correctness is really high as well as his completeness. It's a great approach if you want to sit there and if you want to shift away from going on a completely automatic approach and start implementing some user intervention, then his approach would be a good alternative to that. If you can find a way to manually estimate the percentages of vegetation in there, then you'll realize his improved completeness and correctness. So I decided to go the automation route. I see like it's becoming it's a tough field because now it's certainly a possibility for the industry to outsource this to where you can manually detect these buildings. So when we want these approaches, when we say I have to manually extract a fifth or a fourth of the data set, you're kind of asking a lot, especially if we have to do it for each data set. We just hire a bunch of high school kids, set them up from a workstation, and they'll extract it, and they'll be better at doing it, which is my emphasis for automation on that. But those approaches, those completeness and correctnesses are pretty good. Wasserman's spanning tree is an interesting technique, but he winds up interpolating the LiDAR data in that approach, which is funny because his approach, he was inevitably the one to start documenting the inaccuracies. But so all the numbers are good in their completeness and correctness. What differentiates these approaches is what did you test it on? Did you test it on just large buildings like Panican did? Then that's really not very impressive because a lot of people are able to tackle these large buildings. Let's start looking at the small residential ones as well, which Rottensteiner actually addresses. Wasserman didn't mention in his paper, I don't think, the size of the buildings. He just said this was our data set and this is our completeness.
So in essence, what you're saying is that you did not these are numbers are kind of not a good comparison because you did not use your data set with their algorithm. Am I saying the right thing?
Oh yes, the data set is really kind of a pain because it's difficult to get a hold of the data set. And there is some publicly available information, but a lot of these authors are using their own data sets and they're not making. Rottensteiner was nice enough to make his own data set available to me. So my results for the Fairfield are, and his results I presented right there are for the Fairfield. In that case, both of us tested our algorithm on the same, but it's rare where actually. In the papers I have, none of them wound up comparing other approaches to where the other people wound up using the same data set. Everyone was using their different data set, and they simply report their completeness and correctness as a measure to make themselves competitive. So if you can report your completeness and correctness, and if you can tell us the building sizes, then this is something that's certainly helpful. And Rottensteiner says what the building sizes are, and he shows us his picture. Due to page restrictions, Wasserman might have not shown his. Matanican mentions the building size, but a lot of them are larger buildings in his.
What kind of businesses did Matanican and how do you pronounce it?
I'm probably butchering it as well. He actually had a data set of a campus, and there was only a couple residential buildings on there. Most of the buildings were rather large buildings in that campus.
You said up front that a goal was to automate the whole process, right? That's really the top level goal. With the results that you got, you say it's really automated. If I'm only getting 85 to 90% of the buildings, that means there's correctly, that means there's 10% that I'm missing. That means I got to fill those in manually if I want it to be completely accurate. I've also got some false alarms in there, and I've got to go edit those out.
One thing that's appealing about this is at least I'm not requiring you to manually extract a fourth of the half of the data set to identify the rest.
Okay, I get that part. I get that part. That's stupid to begin with.
I did in Ulrich's paper when he mentions his use of support vector machines. I was pleased to say with his use of support vector machines, maybe I should stop by and come to the machine learning lab, and I'm working in Paris to continue this. With his use of the support vector machine, he wound up training the support vector machine on data set invariant features. So maybe he had to train his stuff, but at least his was using it. But then again, for his approach, he only got to work for larger buildings because the parameters he used for training to identify vegetation also unfortunately identified the house vegetation. I think the thing what's nice about this approach, is it starts out, it's a good in a sense that it's nice, it's automated, and it comes very upfront with coming really close to